party on. I'm Mr. Beat, I guess. I mean, whatever. Between 73 and 79 days after an American president is elected, typically that day is January 20th, they get to have a big party to celebrate them becoming president. We call this a presidential inauguration. An inauguration is just a ceremony in which a person is sworn in to some sort of official position, usually an important position. I mean, we ain't be having inaugurations for people becoming influencers, know what I'm saying? Anyway, here in the United States, a presidential inauguration happens for each new presidential term, even if it's a president who got reelected, continuing in office for a second term. Today, presidential inaugurations are big freaking deals. Hundreds of thousands of people flock to Washington, D.C. to participate in the spectacle. There's a giant parade, a luncheon, concerts, dances, and you can apparently even stand around in the cold in this designated area for the low price of $1,295. Jeez. And apparently more than 1.8 million people stood around in the cold for Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009, making it not only the biggest attended inauguration in American history, but also the largest gathering of people on the National Mall ever. Whoa-ness. And these inaugurations are expensive. The most expensive inauguration in American history was Donald Trump's inauguration in 2017. They reportedly spent $90 million on it. But inaugurations weren't always such a big deal. The first presidential inauguration took place in New York City, the country's first capital city, on April 30th, 1789, nearly 4 months after Americans elected George Washington as their first president, and nearly 2 months after his term had already started. They had to push back the date since so many people couldn't make it to New York City sooner than that. Speaking of which, Washington had to borrow money just to get to his own inauguration. A small crowd gathered as Washington stood on the balcony of the second floor of Federal Hall, the building where Congress used to meet up. Washington quietly mumbled the oath, kissing the Bible after doing so. He also mumbled his short inaugural address. A short while later, somebody in the room called the speech an, quote, embarrassment. But yep, the first inauguration was pretty simple by today's standards. No pomp and circumstance, and Washington didn't have to give a speech, but he did anyway. At his second inauguration in 1793, his speech was the shortest inaugural address ever. It was just 135 words. This was the first inauguration held on March 4th. March 4th would generally serve as Inauguration Day for the next 140 years. The first inauguration in Washington, D.C. was for Thomas Jefferson on March 4th, 1801. It was also the first inauguration to feature the Marine Band playing, a tradition that has happened at every inauguration since. Unlike previous presidents, Jefferson didn't take no fancy carriage. In fact, he walked to his own inauguration in plain clothes. I like to think that some people didn't even notice him arriving due to this. Jump ahead to 1829, and presidential inaugurations began to get a lot more crazy thanks to, you guessed it, Andrew Jackson. It's always Andrew Jackson. He was the first president to take the oath of office on the east side of the U.S. Capitol. Around 21,000 people showed up, and it was pure chaos, especially since security was loose back then. Basically just anybody could walk into the Capitol or White House. People were drunk and loud, so loud that most attendees couldn't even hear Jackson's inaugural address. The post-inauguration party, or as I call it, the after party, got so crazy that Jackson nearly got trampled to death and barely escaped out of a White House window. Officials put out bowls of punch spiked with alcohol on the front lawn to disperse the mob. William Henry Harrison famously chose not to wear a coat, hat, and gloves in the cold as he gave the longest inaugural address to date. It was 8,445 words, including one 736 57-word sentence. After he died just 31 days later, the first unexpected inauguration ever took place in American history, as Vice President John Tyler just decided that he was now going to be president and everyone else just sort of went along with it. It was obviously a low-key affair. Here's the first illustration of an inauguration. That one was for James Polk in 1845. Here's the first photograph of an inauguration. That one was for James Buchanan in 1857. Yeah, there have been lots of American presidents named James. Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration was the first one to feature African Americans in the parade. Here's Lincoln giving his second inaugural address, and there's John Wilkes Booth attending it. Well, allegedly. He might be over here somewhere, but we know he was there. He would assassinate Lincoln just 42 days later. For the rest of the 1800s and into the 1900s, presidential inaugurations became much more elaborate. James Garfield wore a top hat to his inauguration, and almost every president up until John F. Kennedy did the same afterward, apparently. Here's the first inauguration recorded on video. That one was for William McKinley in 1897. Theodore Roosevelt wore a ring with Abraham Lincoln's hairs in it at his second inauguration in 1905. Warren Harding's inauguration in 1921 was the first time people could actually hear an inaugural address without having to stand near the president due to the installation of loudspeakers. 2.5 years later, Harding died, and Calvin Coolidge got sworn in by his dad at a hotel? Some inauguration that was. But that's okay. A year and a half later, Coolidge got a more formal celebration. At that inauguration, an ex-president, William Howard Taft, swore him in. Yeah, that's the only time that happened. That was also the first inauguration broadcast live on the radio. This guy got inaugurated 4 times. You could say he was so tired of being inaugurated that he died just 82 days after the 4th one. Too soon? Anyway, that guy was Franklin Roosevelt, and his first inauguration was the first one to take place on January 20th. Here's the first inauguration televised. That one was for Harry Truman in 1949. Here's the first inauguration televised in color. That one was for John Kennedy in 1961, a pretty famous one. The warmest inauguration day in American history was on January 20th, 1981. That was the day Ronald Reagan became president, and it got up to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. It was also the first inauguration to be held on the west side of the Capitol building facing the National Mall to accommodate more people showing up. Coincidentally, the coldest inauguration day in American history was the day Reagan got inaugurated for his second term, January 21st, 1985. It only got up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit that day. In fact, it was so cold that they had to cancel the parade and move the party indoors. All right, that's enough history. What do you think this is, a History Channel? Oh wait, the History Channel doesn't teach you history. I do. Wait a second. Am I now the History Channel? Holy crap. Anyway, while spending way too much time researching presidential inaugurations lately, I realized the thing that we remember the most about presidential inaugurations are not the swearing in, not the parades, not the dances, not the concerts, whatever. No, we remember the actual speeches the presidents give at their inaugurations, the inaugural addresses. That's what we remember.
Today, we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another, or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
On this day, we come to proclaim an end to the petty grievances and false promises, the recriminations and worn-out dogmas that for far too long have strangled our politics.
But this is a time when the future seems a door you can walk right through.
And so today we pledge an end to the era of deadlock and drift, and a new season of American renewal has begun.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
So for the rest of this video, we're going to look at the greatest parts of inauguration speeches by presidents in American history, also called inaugural addresses. Come here, Patsy. This is my dog, Patsy, and she's been in some of my videos before. She's 5 years old, and she means a lot to me and my family. We try to feed her the healthiest food possible, but you know, there's a lot of crap out there. Fortunately, this video is sponsored by Sundays for Dogs, and Patsy's really excited to try it out here. So the good thing about this food, more than anything, I could eat this. It literally says human grade on here. Human grade. That's how high quality this this food is. She's pretty excited. Yeah, it's because we want our dog to live a long, healthy life. And you're tired of me yapping, you want me to pour you some food. Let's do this. I think my dog approves. It's 90% meat, 10% superfoods. Give your dog the chance to try Sundays and watch them fall in love. Get 50% off your 2-week trial of Sundays at sundaysfordogs.com/MrBeat, or use my code MrBeat. If you sign up during January, you'll get a free Fi dog collar equipped with 6 months of live GPS and activity tracking. So make sure you sign up today. Use this code right here, and you will save 50% off your first order of Sundays. The link is in the description of this video. Thanks to Sundays for Dogs for sponsoring this video, and thank you to Patsy for being such a good dog. She likes it. When news media organizations tend to focus on highlights of the presidential inauguration, they almost always focus on when the president is being sworn in. But contrary to popular belief, a person does not become president simply by officially taking the oath of office. Nah, man. According to the 20th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the president-elect officially takes office at noon on Inauguration Day, regardless of whether they have taken the oath of office or not. Now, while Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution does say the president has to take an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution in order to do their job, there is nothing in the Constitution that says the new president has to throw a big party as well. In fact, if a president wanted to save, I don't know, $90 million, they could just stay home and chill. Regardless, ever since George Washington set the first precedent of giving an inaugural address, 39 future presidents also felt obligated to do the same. If you're questioning my math, 5 presidents never gave an inaugural address, okay? Trust me, bro. And as it turns out, an inaugural address is a big freaking deal. A good inaugural address signals a strong start to a presidential term. It's a chance to unify the country, a chance for the president to make their most important goals, principles, and values clear. It sets the tone immediately, not just to the general public, but specifically to Congress, of whom the president will have to work with over the next 4 years if they want to get any of their agenda passed. I read every single presidential inaugural address in American history. Why, you may ask? Because I am a madman, dadgummit. And I noticed some patterns. I mean, there's the predictable stuff. Most of the inaugural addresses talked about promoting freedom, equality, democracy, etc., blah, blah, blah. Most of them predictably praised the Constitution. Most of them called for political unity. Many of them spelled out the president's vision for the role of the federal government, especially in relation to the states and foreign nations. Many of them give a shout out to God and their homies. Most of them paid special attention to the importance of economic prosperity. Even in relatively good economic times, presidents wouldn't shut up about the economy in their inaugural addresses. But also, I was a bit surprised to notice how humble so many presidents were in their inaugural addresses, often saying things like, "My fellow citizens." At first, I thought about doing some kind of tier list, going through all the best and worst inaugural speeches in American history. But then I thought, well, that's not fair. There were some good parts of bad inaugural speeches and some bad parts of good inaugural speeches. Why not break them all down? and steal all the good parts of every single presidential inaugural address to form a super inaugural address. So that's what I did. The following is the best inaugural address of all time. Did I plagiarize it from all American presidents? Of course I did. But while this is a mashup of sorts, I basically just took my favorite parts of presidential inaugural addresses and I hopefully turned them into a cohesive whole. Hopefully. Meaning, if you are listening to this instead of watching it, hopefully you'll barely be able to tell when I'm switching from president to president. Although you'll likely be able to tell when I'm sharing my favorite parts of inaugural speeches that happened a long time ago. Look, skibidi toilet, people used to just talk differently back in the day. Get used to it. And despite some of these words coming from more than 200 years ago, they remain relevant, kind of sadly. But yeah, they're timeless. Here is the best presidential inaugural address of all time. Friends and fellow citizens, it is a relief to feel that no heart but my own can know the personal regrets and bitter sorrow over which I have been born to a position so suitable for others rather than desirable for myself. I am honored and humbled to stand here where so many of America's leaders have come before me, and so many will follow. I avail myself of this customary and solemn occasion to express the gratitude which their confidence inspires and to acknowledge the accountability which my situation enjoins. While the magnitude of their interest convinces me that no thanks can be adequate to the honor they have conferred, it admonishes me that the best return I can make is the zealous dedication of my humble abilities to their service and their good. The majesty of this moment has excited in my bosom. I was summoned by my country, whose voice I can never hear but with veneration and love. It is my good fortune, moreover, to have the path in which I am to tread lighted by examples of illustrious services successfully rendered in the most trying difficulties by those who have marched before me. Service is the supreme commitment of life. In serving, we recognize a simple but powerful truth. We need each other, and we must care for one another. My guide will be the Constitution of the United States. I entertain no doubt of its continuance in all its energy, and my mind is prepared without hesitation to lay myself under the most solemn obligations to support it to the utmost of my power. The Constitution itself, plainly written as it is, the safeguard of our federative compact, the offspring of concession and compromise, binding together in the bonds of peace and union this great and increasing family of free and independent states, will be the chart by which I shall be directed. Under this Constitution, the boundaries of freedom have been enlarged. The foundations of order and peace have been strengthened. The oath I now take to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States not only impressively defines the great responsibility I assume, but suggests obedience to constitutional commands as the rule by which my official conduct must be guided. I shall, to the best of my ability and within my sphere of duty, preserve the Constitution by loyally protecting every grant of federal power it contains, by defending all its restraints when attacked by impatience and restlessness, and by enforcing its limitations and reservations in favor of the states and the people. It is my firm conviction that the civilized world is tending toward republicanism, or government by the people through their chosen representatives, and that our own great republic is destined to be the guiding star to all others. Never before have men tried so vast and formidable an experiment as that of administering the affairs of a continent under the forms of a democratic republic. In a republic, the first rule for the guidance of the citizen is obedience to law. Under a despotism, the law may be imposed upon the subject. He has no voice in its making, no influence in its administration. It does not represent him. Under a free government, the citizen makes his own laws, chooses his own administrators, which do represent him. All of the lessons of history and experience must be lost upon us if we are content to trust alone to the peculiar advantages we happen to possess. The boasted privilege of a Roman citizen was to him a shield only against a petty provincial ruler, whilst the proud democrat of Athens would console himself under a sentence of death for a supposed violation of the national faith, which no one understood and which at times was the subject of the mockery of all, or the banishment from his home, his family, and his country, with or without an alleged cause, that it was the act not of a single tyrant or hated aristocracy, but of his assembled countrymen. Far different is the power of our sovereignty. It can interfere with no one's faith, prescribe forms of worship for no one's observance, inflict no punishment, but after well ascertained guilt, the result of investigation under rules prescribed by the Constitution itself. Union, justice, tranquility, the common defense, the general welfare, and the blessings of liberty all have been promoted by the government under which we have lived. Standing at this point of time, looking back to that generation which has gone by and forward to that which is advancing, we may at once indulge in grateful exultation and in cheering hope. From the experience of the past, we derive instructive lessons for the future. In Washington's day, the task of the people was to create and weld together a nation. In Lincoln's day, the task of the people was to preserve that nation from disruption from within. In this day, the task of the people is to save that nation and its institutions from disruption from without. We are aided by all who wish to live in freedom from fear, even by those who live today in fear under their own governments. We are aided by all who want relief from the lies of propaganda, who desire truth and sincerity. We are aided by all who desire self-government and a voice in deciding their own affairs. It is in keeping with tradition throughout our history that I should express simply and directly the opinions which I hold concerning some of the matters of present importance. For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Our economy is badly weakened, a consequence of greed and irresponsibility on the part of some, but also our collective failure to make hard choices and prepare the nation for a new age. Homes have been lost, jobs shed, businesses shuttered. Our healthcare is too costly. Our schools fail too many. And each day brings further evidence that the ways we use energy strengthen our adversaries and threaten our planet. May we pursue the right without self-righteousness. May we know unity without conformity. May we grow in strength without pride in self. May we, in our dealings with all peoples of the earth, ever speak truth and serve justice. We want no wars of conquest. We must avoid the temptation of territorial aggression. Our international policy is always to promote peace. Peace, commerce, and friendship with all nations. And this not merely as the best means of promoting our own material interests, but in a spirit of Christian benevolence toward our fellow men, wherever their lot may be cast. We must simplify our tax system, make it more fair. I recommend an amendment to the Constitution prescribing a term of 6 years for the presidential office and forbidding a re-election. In a land of great wealth, families must not live in hopeless poverty. In a land rich in harvest, children just must not go hungry. In a land of healing miracles, neighbors must not suffer and die unattended. Happiness lies not in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement and the thrill of creative effort. The joy and moral stimulation of work no longer must be forgotten in the mad chase of evanescent profits. We are to beware of all men who would turn the tasks and necessities of the nation to their own private profit or use them for the building up of private power. In conclusion, I ask patient forbearance, one toward another throughout the land, and a determined effort on the part of every citizen to do his share towards cementing a happy union. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Unless we in America work to preserve freedom, there will be no freedom. Let us learn together and laugh together and work together and pray together, confident that in the end we will triumph together. We shall strive for perfection. We shall not achieve it immediately, but we still shall strive. And so, there is much to do. And tomorrow the work begins. I do not mistrust the future. I do not fear what is ahead. For our problems are large, but our heart is larger. Our challenges are great, but our will is greater. In taking again the oath of office as President of the United States, I assume the solemn obligation of leading the American people forward along the road over which they have chosen to advance. While this duty rests upon me, I shall do my utmost to speak their purpose and to do their will. I shall now enter on the duties to which my fellow citizens have again called me, and shall proceed in the spirit of those principles which they have approved. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America. So there you have it. If I was elected president, I'd just give that speech at my inauguration. Just plagiarize all the presidents. Not only was that the best inaugural address of all time, in my opinion, it was also one of the shortest. The average length of a presidential inaugural address is 2,340 words, and mine was just 1,566 words. Because ain't nobody got time for that. Speaking of which, this video has gone on way too long. I got Mrs. Beat out here freezing her toes off. Why didn't you tell me to quit a long time ago? Yeah, this got way out of hand. Or as I call it, the after party. But inaugurations are just the beginning. What other fun facts did I leave out about presidential inaugurations? Let me know down below. Rutherford B. Hayes, look at that. Some of you started commenting before the video was even over. What a rush of voices waiting to be heard. All right, well, thanks for that, and keep the comments coming. Thanks for staying curious.